Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. So we are, of course, dealing with this very arcane subject, and I'm going to do the next little piece from the Torah Temimah in terms of his introduction, and maybe get into a teeny bit more of the last little section of his introduction. But at least this was what I was able to prepare. So let me go into the screen share. So basically, in this little section here, he's talked about the various kinds. First of all, he talks about the fact that there are three major types of leprosy, right? There's one that's on the skin. There's one that comes from boils or a burn, and one has to do with baldness, a kind of baldness. So here he discusses some of the rules, and they're somewhat different rules in terms of the diagnostics involved, and in terms of how much quarantine one goes through, or the kind of quarantine one goes through. So he discusses this here with the type that's on the skin. Here we discussed what happens if one receives a burn or some kind of strike on the skin. And he discusses what it might look like on some levels. There are times when, while there is some kind of reaction on the skin, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's tzara'at. It may mean something else, but then the priest has to take a look and see what's developing, etc., etc. What we notice about the first kind is that, for example, if the condition after a week does not change, it hasn't gotten worse, it hasn't gotten better, then the person goes through a second week of quarantine. And as I recollect, if it hasn't changed again, I believe he is deemed to have tzara'at. However, of course, if it's improved, then he wouldn't be. In the case of the burn or the boil, that from being burnt, or the smack on the skin, kind of trauma that it's had, there's no 2 weeks of quarantine. It either is healed or it's determined that it's tzara'at. And now we get into the third paragraph, Sif Gimel, and he says, karachat ugabachat. These are two Hebrew terms for a certain types of baldness, and he's going to define what each kind is. We don't really have words in English other than baldness, and that's the idea of kereach, right? That the head is bare. But gabachat, we'll keep going. Nikra'u mi, okay, these are called, this kind of karachat ugabachat are called mi shenashru kol sa'arot rosho, a person whose hairs have all fallen out. Nashru means to fall off, right? All his hairs of his head, al yedei choli, either from some kind of illness, or al yedei makah, or some kind of wound, or al yedei sika besamim, or in fact, if he had a sika, would be some kind of rubbing, right, of samim. Literally, it means spices. Charifim means strong, but it could mean like some kind of very strong drug or ointment or something. This is what we're talking about. If he's rubbed his head with this kind of something, it could be maybe a depilatory of some kind, but regardless, it can happen in three ways, is what he's telling us. The eina ru'a legadel se'ar, and it is no longer capable of raising hair anymore, that part of the skin. V'im nashru ma sheshofea min hakakod, and if what fell off was that which sort of comes down from the top of the head, al orpo, to his neck, ad pika shel tzavar, to the protruding cartilage of the neck. So this is how far down it might go. Nika karachat. That is what we call karachat, when the baldness comes towards the back of the head. But if the baldness occurs in the front of the head, right? What comes down in the front, ad keneged padachto, up to his forehead, nikra gabachat. That is what we call gabachat. So in Hebrew, there are two different terms for where the baldness is occurring. Vehem mitamot bishnei simanim, and there are two indications, okay, two symptoms that renders a person tameh, that would render a person considered to be leprous. That would be the diagnosis. B'michya, so this has to do, I believe we said that this has to do with some kind of rawness, right? That the skin is exhibiting a type of rawness, pisayon, and that has to do with spreading. Velo b'sa'ar lavan, and the difference between this and the very first kind of tzara'at is that it doesn't involve, obviously it's baldness, and it's on the head, and obviously it doesn't have white hair. He's bald, he doesn't have hair. V'chein mitamot bishnei shavuot, but they also take 2 weeks. They involve a 2-week process, ba'ofan shenitpa'er, in the way that was explained b'seif aleph in the first paragraph, uvichlal karachat v'gabachat, and including in the manifestation of this rear baldness and this front of the head baldness, heve gam netek. We also include something called a netek. And I looked up the word netek. Just to remind you, anytime I've got a J, you notice these J's, it refers to the Jastrow dictionary and the page. And because the page has 2 columns on it, the left side column is the A column, and the B side column is the right side column is the B column, just to help you to find the word, just to show where the word is. It's a reference to where the word is. And this netik refers, the way he explains it quite specifically, as a blanched spot in the head or beard. Ela shenetek, okay, choser umegadel se'ar. But in a case of this blanched spot, it can grow hair once again. And he says, now this particular abbreviation, right? It looks like a kaf and a mem, and I know there is Kesef Mishneh. Kesef Mishneh is a commentary on the Rambam, on the Mishnah Torah by Maimonides, and I'm not sure if this is what he's talking about, if he's referencing the Kesef Mishneh, Perek Hey, chapter 5, halacha chet, the 8th halacha, mitumat tzara'at. And I assume that in Maimonides, there's a section, this book of Maimonides, the Mishnah Torah, is this encyclopedic work on Jewish law. Just an amazing piece of writing where Maimonides, with tremendous clarity, clarifies all the aspects of Jewish law found in the Talmud and elsewhere. It's just such a tour de force, indicating the guy's brilliance. He's a complete genius. Of course, there's a saying that from Moses of the Torah to Moses Maimonides, there never was a Moses. That's in Hebrew, they say that. So I just got to start on this 4th paragraph. You can see it's a pretty major paragraph here. But I just, in this one, he says, Erech halovin b'tzara'at, or habasar. He says the quality of the whiteness, right? There's white and there's white. So he says the type of whiteness we're talking about in the tzarat, in the skin of the flesh, shezacharnu b'seif aleph, which we mentioned in the first paragraph, hu shehiyeh lo pachot miloven krum beitzah. It means that it cannot be any, I would say less. When it says less white, I think what he means is paler. It cannot be any more pale than the whiteness of krum beitzah means the membrane surrounding an egg. In other words, if you look at how white that is, if this is paler than that particular white, it's not considered sarat. Ulamala mizeh. And he says, and something that may be, I would think means darker, a darker white than this. Kafi sheyit ba'er, as will be explained. Aval lavnunit shehi diha mikrum beitza. But any whiteness, lavnunit, lavan is the word, Hebrew word for the color white. Any whiter, shehi diha mikrum beitza, which is fainter than that of the membrane of an egg, Einat sarat ela bohak. It's not considered sarat, it's considered something called white scurf. And I looked up scurf because I'm not familiar with that English word. And apparently it's something like dandruff. It's another word that describes dandruff, that kind of peeling there. And then he goes on, v'arba marot yesh b'tzarat or habasar, and there are four ways in which the leprosy or the tzarat of the flesh, of the skin of the flesh can appear. There are four types. Lavan kesheleg, the first is if it's white as snow. Vehu hanikra baheret. And that's what is meant when the Torah talks about this word baheret, a bright spot. Shnayim, the second one is lavan ketsemer naki shel keves ben yomo. And the second type of whiteness we're describing is the whiteness of the wool, of the clean wool of a day-old lamb. Ulavninuto pechuta miloven sheleg, and looks a little less white than the whiteness of snow. Vahu nikra sa'et. And so what the rabbis did is they took these words like sa'et and baheret that are found in the Torah that we've come across, and they gave it a definition of how much whiteness we were talking about. So the sa'et is a little less bright, I would go say, than a baheret. And the third one is lavan kisid ha'echal, and this is as white as the plaster of the temple building. Ulavninuto, and its whiteness pechuta miloven hatzemer, and this is a little less white than the whiteness of the wool. Vahu hanikra sapachat, and that's what is called a sapachat in the Torah. Mitam sheyit ba'er besamuch, for the reason that will be explained eventually. And the fourth kind of whiteness is lavan kakrum beitza. Okay, and that fourth whiteness is the whiteness of an egg, the membrane of an egg. Velavninuto pchuta miloven sid ha'echal, and its whiteness is less than the plaster of the sanctuary. V'nikra gamken sapachat, and it's also called a sapachat, kafi sheyit ba'er, as we will explain subsequently. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop right here. And of course, we also have tomorrow. I'm going to just stop in terms of this. We'll go back into the text. That's the point I'm making here. So I'm going to make a little mark. And so I know where to start. And let's go onto here. Okay. And we'll be starting right here. Okay. And goes into how the diagnosis takes place. So that's, at least this is just finishing up, and hopefully we'll finish up his introduction tomorrow. But I want to have a chance to look it over before I try to share it with you. There's quite a bit of vocabulary involved that I need to check out. But look at this. Here are these Seit, Sapachat, Baheret. You see these, we've translated them this way, but they actually are there to define the whiteness of this particular manifestation of Tzaraat. Let me go here. This is how far we got the last time. So let me find that. All right. Very good. Let's see. Let me make sure. Right here, we're still talking about the regular, I believe, the regular first type of tzaraat, right, in the flesh. V'ra'ah hakohen oto bayom hashvi'i shenit. This is the case where he is actually sequestered for a second time, put in quarantine for a second week. V'ra'ah hakohen, and the kohen shall examine him on the second seventh day, right? Second week, the second week. V'hinei keha hanega, and it means, and the tzaraat, his fainter, has become more faint. V'lo pasa hanega ba'or, nor has the wound spread in the skin. V'tiharo hakohen, and in this particular case, the kohen is going to declare him pure. No, does not have leprosy, does not have tzaraat. Mispachat he, the Torah is saying it is a rash. V'chibes begadav v'taher, and he should wash his clothes, and he is rendered tahor. He is considered pure. However, ve'im pasot tifseha mispachat pa'or, but if this mispachat should spread in the skin, acharei hera oto el hakohen l'tarato. This means after he's been declared pure, but now it turns out that this particular rash is spreading. V'nir'ah shenit el hakohen. He needs to be shown a second time to the priest. Let's take a look at the Rashi on this before we go any further. So we said, right, okay. Keha, right, keha, the word keha. Hikha mimar ito, ha im amad b'marito, o pasa tameh. So he says, kaha, he says it means it absolutely had to become fainter. It had to be perceptibly fainter from how it appeared, from its original appearance. And he says, so if in fact it remained the same way, in other words, it didn't become fainter, or pasa, or it spread, tameh, he's considered tameh. Mispachat, he takes the word mispachat, Shem nega tahor. He says this is the term for a kind of wound that is not considered leprous, that is pure. V'chibes begadav v'taher, he should wash his clothes and be considered pure. Ho'il v'niskar hesker, he says, because he was obligated to be quarantined. In other words, we might well ask the question, why does he have to wash his clothes if he, in fact, he's been pure all the time? He's been considered pure. He says, because he was initially required to go into quarantine, nikra tameh, he would be considered at that point tameh, impure, v'tzarich tefillah, and he would require immersion. He'd have to go, I believe it wasn't just a regular mikvah. It was a special kind of mikvah. Whether it was mikvah of running water, I'm not absolutely certain, but it does seem to me, as I recollect from doing this many, many, many years ago, that the kind of mikvah that was required for tzaraat was a different kind of mikvah, different kind of immersion font. Okay, so we said that. 'Chet, this particular verse, right? That it spread. okay, after he had actually been declared to be pure, but now it had spread. V'tim'o hakohen, umashma'o, umishitam'o, and once the kohen has declared him to be tameh, hare hu muchlat. He's not in other words, at this stage, he is determined to be a leper, a metzorah. He is. It's not that he's under question as to still requiring diagnosis. The diagnosis is complete. V'zakuk letziporim. So he is going to be required to bring birds, v'tiglachat, and shaving, u'lekorban ha'omor, and the sacrifice that's mentioned beParsha zot tihiyeh, in the section that says that starts off with the words as to what the ritual is that a metzorah has to do when they're cured of their tzarat. And that's, I believe, in the next parsha, that we'll read about the process by which metzorah, once he no longer is symptomatic, comes back into the camp. Tzara'at he says, ha-mispachat hazot, this particular mispachat, this rash, or however we want to translate this, is considered to be tzara'at. Tzara'at. So he says the word tzara'at itself, lashon nekeva, he says it's a feminine word, nega, however the word nega, it's got to do with why it says tzara'at, he, right? That uses the word he, which means she. That's the female pronoun, okay? Whereas the word nega, which also means wound, right? Lashon zachar, it's a male, it's a masculine term. Let me see if there's any more Rashi here. No. Let's do a little bit. Actually, this is a new paragraph, so we will. Okay, let's do a little bit more. Nega tzarat, the wound of tzarat, ki tihiyeh ba'adam, when it is found in a person, v'huva el hakohen, he shall be brought to the priest. V'ra'ah hakohen, and the kohen is observing, he's examining him. V'hinei sa'et levana ba'or. So now we're talking about a sa'et, right? Some kind of eruption, in a white eruption in the skin. Vehi hafcha se'ar lavan, and the hair has become white. Umichyat basar chai baseit. And again, we're talking about this, the rawness, right? It has fresh rawness in this sate, in this eruption. So let's take a look. So now he has a michyat. So he says, it comes from a French word, looks here like sanement, something like that, and it means gesundheit, heilug. In other words, he's saying something that at least initially is considered healed, right? It's well, balaz. So it says, shenehefach miktzat haloven. He says what's happened is a little of the whiteness, shebetoch haseit, that is in this eruption, has changed. It's altered. Lemar'eh basar, to it looks now like flesh. Basar literally means meat, okay? Af hu siman tuma. So Rashi is saying this too is an indication of impurity. Sa'ar lavan belo michya. Siman tuma. Okay, so white hair without this rawness, umichya. So he says a white hair without this rawness, umichya belo sa'ar lavan, and the rawness, I believe, without having this white hair. Afal pi shelo ne'emra michya ela b'seit, even though it doesn't use this term michya, except when it comes to this eruption, af b'chol hamarot v'toldatayhem, he says, regardless, in all the appearances and similar appearances, hu siman tuma, it nevertheless is an indication of impurity. So just one more thing, Tzora'at noshenet hi. Okay, so this means, I'm trying to think of how to translate the word noshenet. It means that it's there. It's sorry, but it's an old. It's really serious, a severe form of this. But or besaro, okay, in the flesh of his, in the skin of his flesh, vetimo hakohen, and the kohen has to pronounce him impure. Lo yaskirenu, there is no need to quarantine him, ki tamehu, because he is in fact tameh. He is in fact considered a mitzorah. So here we go. Tzarat moshenet hi. In other words, it's been there for a while. Makah yishana. He says it's an old wound. It is a whole old wound. Tachat hamichya, underneath this eruption, or again, how we want to understand michya is the way Rashi was explaining it sounded like normal flesh. But anyway, just trying to make sense of this. V'chavera or chabura, if that vav is not well. Zo, yes, okay. So it means, and this particular wound, okay, near eight beri'iyah milmala, it's seen in this examination. Right, it's right there. It's right there for him to see. It's right there superficially. All right, it's right. V'tachteha mele'a lecha, and below it there is liquid. Shelo tomar, so one should not say v'ho'i ve'ata michya atarena. So apparent, I'm trying to make sense of this. It says you shouldn't think that that there's some appearance of health to the skin, apparently, because remember, that's how he translated michya, atarena, I shall render it pure. So again, this needs a little bit more research. I'm going to have to do a little bit more digging into this to fully understand what he's talking about here. And on that dubious note, I'm going to have to end. Okay, so let me put this here. The marking in terms of there, right there, and this, and I'm going to stop the share. And before I end the recording, any comments that you'd like to have on the recording? Harlan?
Yes, I have a comment. When I was a teenager, I was losing my hair, and I thought, "Oh my God, it's terrible." Now I'm so happy that my beard is not blanched, and my head is not blanched, and my head is as white as an egg. I'm pure. I'm pure.
Okay, so we are very happy to hear that, Harlan. However, I suppose you are in a sense in quarantine where you are, but in relationship to where we are, yeah, I would tell you that all this stuff for now, okay, is academic. It's academic. And the reason why it isn't mentioned in the Talmud and other places is precisely because we no longer apply these particular categories. I'm pretty certain of that we study these things because they're in the Torah, and there may well be lessons that we learn from it. So, for example, the idea of, we mentioned this already, the idea of slander and bad mouthing and gossip and those sorts of things. But beyond that, I don't believe there are leper colonies in the sense of the ones that are mentioned in the Torah. I mean, leprosy, that's the clinical leprosy, has nothing to do with the leprosy that we're talking about here. So just
leprosy is contagious.
Yeah, I understand that it is mildly contagious. I don't know that it's virulently contagious. I know that it's mildly contagious. But the fact is that we are studying this much more from an academic standpoint, just for the merit of studying Torah in and of itself, than because there are any real practical applications of what we're studying here, which apply to most of the other things that we tend to study. But Leviticus, deals with sacrifices and things like that. We don't practice animal sacrifice anymore. In fact, we don't have this system anymore. And we study it because we consider there to be merit in learning about it and knowing about it. Things could change, situation could change, but by studying it, we're showing that we care about it, even though we can't practice it. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording.
Want to practice it.
Let me stop it.